the warm, buzzing town of Lagos lived a girl named Jenny. She wasn't just beautiful, she was sunlight in motion. Tall, slender, with an aura of elegance that made people pause and admire. Jenny was the kind of girl who wrote love letters to the wind and believed loyalty was more than a promise. It was a bond of the soul. Beside her always was Sandra. Sandra was a vision of fierce beauty. Voluptuous, magnetic, confident. Her walk could silence a street. Where Jenny was soft grace, Sandra was bold fire. The two girls were inseparable. From childhood pranks to teenage dreams, they were yin and yang, two halves of an unspoken sisterhood. They swore by the sisters' code, no lies. No theft, no betrayal. No sharing love interest, ever? And then came Marcus, Jenny's first real love. Marcus was sweet, grounded, and the kind of guy who held her hand like it was the most sacred thing he'd ever touched. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. For the first time, Jenny imagined a future with Marcus in it. Sandra cheered from the sidelines, or so Jenny thought. Because betrayal doesn't always shout, it whispers. One rainy evening after a small fight with Marcus, Jenny decided to surprise him with cupcakes and apologies. Marcus called of their relationship with no tangible reason. She never knew that Sandra had stolen her joy away. Jenny was heartbroken, but then she deserves better. Heartbreak is not the end, it's a redirection. Jenny wiped her tears, picked up her dreams, and started fresh. Months passed, she met Melvin. Freshly returned from London, a Cambridge graduate with charm carved into every inch of his smile. Melvin was elegant with a heartbeat. Girls swooned. Paparazzi whispered, but he only had eyes for Jenny. Their love story blossomed like wildflowers, quick, colorful, unstoppable. He took her to rooftop dinners. He listened. He understood. He told her, "My parents want me to find a wife before I return to London. I want that wife to be you, Jenny." Everything was perfect. Until Jenny made a mistake. She introduced Melvin to Sandra. Sandra, whose curves turned heads. Sandra, whose presence demanded attention. Sandra, who once stole the man Jenny loved. Immediately, Sandra walking. Jenny said, "Sandra, meet Melvin." She said cheerfully. Sandra cheerfully said to Melvin, "Pleasure to meet you." Her eyes lingering just a moment too long on Melvin. He smiled politely, not knowing this was the start of something dangerous. What Jenny didn't know was that Marcus hadn't left her without cause. Sandra had been the reason. And now history was starting to repeat itself. A week after that casual introduction, Sandra got Melvin's address through a mutual contact. She dressed to kill and went, not to Melvin, but his mother. Wearing a neutral mask and using an altered voice, Sandra sat in the elegant parlor of Mrs. Adesua Winston, Melvin's refined, sharp-eyed mother. "Good afternoon, Ma. I'm someone close to Melvin's fiancé," she began, keeping her identity hidden. "There are things you must know about Jenny. She's after your son's money. She's not as innocent as she seems." She painted Jenny in the darkest shades possible, greedy, manipulative, and secretive. And then she left, as if she hadn't just destroyed a future. Within days, Melvin grew cold. Calls became texts. Texts became silence. Jenny, confused and heartbroken, wept to Sandra, who pulled her close and whispered, "You need prayers, deliverance, this is not ordinary." Jenny, shattered, believed her. But while she cried, Sandra was slipping into Melvin's world, stealthily, sweetly. She met him in secret, fed him lies about Jenny, played the role of understanding one. And then a few months later, a quiet wedding. Sandra married Melvin. Jenny wasn't even invited. And as Melvin returned to London, not with his new bride, but to reunite with his Caribbean girlfriend, who had no idea he was now married, Sandra celebrated her victory in silence. To her, smartness had triumphed. She had won, but fate was only getting started. Sandra lived in a golden prison, married, yes, but loved? Not even in the faintest way. Melvin had vanished into London's sleek streets, barely dropping a message here and there. Meanwhile, Sandra, heavily pregnant and surrounded by luxury, began to feel the walls close in. She dialed his number. No answer. She sent long, sweet messages. No reply. So she turned to her in-laws. "Mama, I'm worried," she confessed during one visit. "Melvin hasn't called in weeks. He doesn't even ask about the baby." Mrs. Adesua, now distant but still poised, offered a crisp smile. "Melvin is busy. Expansion matters. International markets. You know how men are." Excuses. Polished lies. Sandra started to see the picture. Melvin never loved her. She was a decoration, a bride to silence his parents and impress guests. The baby, a burden she now carried alone. And the worst part, the fine girl had cast. The glow was gone. The snatched waist was rounded with pregnancy. Her once magnetic aura was replaced with sleepless eyes and swollen feet. Meanwhile, Jenny? Oh, sweet karma had come gently, dressed in bespoke linen. Jenny met a handsome, tall guy. He was introduced as Nathaniel Okoye, CEO of multiple manufacturing plants, tech mogul, philanthropist, and one of the youngest billionaires in Lagos. He smiled like he'd been waiting just for her. They connected instantly. Where Melvin was polished and distant, Nathaniel was real and present. He made Jenny laugh, challenged her ideas, and believed in her dreams. He didn't just love her, he celebrated her. Months into their relationship, Jenny and Nathaniel hosted a private yacht dinner and invited a few friends. One of them, Sandra, pregnant, slower now, less radiant, but her heart still twisted. Seeing Nathaniel, the wealth he carried, the love he lavished on Jenny, something burned inside her again, greed. Even now, with a child on the way and a ghost of a husband, she wanted what Jenny had. Jenny looked radiant in a midnight blue gown, hand wrapped tightly in Nathaniel's. Sandra, noticeably pregnant but still clinging to Grace, arrived later, draped in luxury, but weighed by her secrets. Nathaniel had noticed Sandra lurking around, whispering to guests, trying to plant shadows where light lived. Eventually, she cornered him with her honeyed voice. "She's not who you think she is," Sandra murmured. "Jenny, I mean, she's not as pure as she acts." Nathaniel, a sharp man with a lion's heart, didn't flinch. He smiled. Then he pretended like he was making a call but was recording. After a few minutes, he beckoned Jenny over. She arrived with a glass of wine, glowing beside him. "You said this heavily pregnant woman is your best friend?" he asked quietly. Jenny smiled brightly. "She's my ride or die, my blood, my sister. Nothing can separate us." Nathaniel paused, his gaze deep. "And how much do you trust her?" Jenny, with a soft laugh, replied, 90%. He nodded again. Then, in a calm voice, he signaled one of his guards. "Call Sandra here." Sandra waddled over slowly, sensing something was off. Her palms were sweaty, her smile fake. Nathaniel leaned back. "Can you kindly repeat what you just told me about Jenny?" Sandra's face drained. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her hand shot to her stomach. "Oh, I think it's cramps," she whispered dramatically, playing her escape card. But Nathaniel didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket and played the audio on loudspeakers. "She's not who you think she is." Gasps rippled across the party. Jenny's wine glass slipped from her fingers, crashing onto the yacht's deck. "It's been you all along," she whispered, trembling. "You broke me once. You stole my joy twice. I trusted you." Sandra lowered her head, tears pooling in shame. Her world caved in as guests whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. Jenny fell to her knees in tears. Not because of Sandra's betrayal, but because her heart had carried the weight of a fake sister for too long. 4 months after that unforgettable yacht scandal, Sandra gave birth to twin boys. She held them in her arms, tiny, innocent, unaware of the chaos surrounding their arrival. For a moment, Sandra thought things might turn around. Maybe Melvin would call, maybe he'd come back. Maybe this was the anchor that would bind her fractured world. But Melvin didn't call, he didn't text. And the only thing tying her to his world now were his parents, who were growing colder by the day. One evening, seated in the massive mansion's sitting room, Sandra finally exploded. "Why hasn't your son reached out? These are his children, too," she screamed, cradling her babies protectively. Mrs. Adesua raised an eyebrow. "Watch your tone, girl. You should be grateful you're even living here." "Grateful?" Sandra's voice cracked. "For what? Being abandoned?" The argument escalated, voices echoing down the marble halls. Sandra, burning with rage, shouted her final warning. "If Melvin doesn't come home, I'm taking my sons and leaving this place forever." Mrs. Adesua didn't blink. She stood up and signaled the guards. And just like that, Sandra was pushed out, bags in hand. No babies, no husband. No explanation. She cried, screamed, begged, but it was too late. Her smartness had finally outsmarted her. Elsewhere in Lagos, beneath a canopy of orchids and golden lights, Nathaniel proposed to Jenny at the top of a seaside tower. "From the moment I met you," he said, dropping to one knee, "I knew you weren't just light, you were my lighthouse." Will you be my forever? Tears streamed down Jenny's face. Yes, she whispered as fireworks lit up the sky. Their wedding was the talk of the nation. Elegant, exclusive, exquisite, love woven into every detail. Guests spoke of how radiant the bride looked, how tender the groom's gaze was. Jenny had healed. She had bloomed. Meanwhile, Sandra, now wandering between friends' couches and cheap motels, tried to sneak back into Jenny's life. She sent texts, voice notes, showed up uninvited at events, but Jenny, she had learned. No more second chances for people who use loyalty as a weapon. Sandra eventually faded, back into the shadows she came from. No husband, no children. No, Jenny. Just memories of what could have been. It had been over a year since the yacht party, since the betrayal was unmasked, and since Sandra's world crumbled into ash. Jenny, now Mrs. Jenny Okoye, stood as a beacon of grace, strength, and renewed joy. Her life was filled with purpose, love, and dignity. Everything she had once lost, now restored. She never spoke ill of Sandra. She didn't have to. The truth had done all the speaking. One cool Harmattan morning in Lekki, news spread like wildfire. Melvin had returned to Nigeria, and not alone. He arrived arm in arm with his legally wedded Caribbean wife, tall, radiant, and dripping in elegance. The woman Jenny was once replaced with now become Melvin's trophy bride, introduced to all his networks, welcomed into the society Sandra once craved to be part of. When Sandra saw them at a high-profile fashion event, she stood frozen behind the crowd, holding a plastic bag of pastries she was selling to survive. Melvin didn't even glance her way. Not once. His wife smiled, shook hands, and posed for photos. Sandra's heart shattered all over again. She ran home and cried for hours. Not for Melvin. Not even for her twins, who were no longer hers. She wept for herself, for her greed, her envy, her betrayal. And the moment she realized, if she hadn't snatched Melvin, Jenny might have still walked away from him. But at least she wouldn't have lost everything. Somewhere across town, Jenny sat in her private garden, sipping tea, writing poetry under the blossoms Nathaniel had planted just for her. When asked once by a journalist during an interview what she learned from Heartbreak and Betrayal, she smiled and answered, "Never water snakes and call it loyalty, but always thank them, because without their venom, I wouldn't have found my wings."